However, we do invite you to stay engaged with us throughout. Please feel free to drop questions or reflections in the chat as we go along. We'll be monitoring that and have time for a Q&A at the end. We also have a few ways to stay connected with us beyond today. Please save the date for our upcoming Women in Justice event on September 23rd at the Italian Community Center. Additionally, you can visit our website at benedictcenter.org or follow us on social media at Benedict Center to stay connected. So, to ground us on today's conversation, I want to take a moment to share why this matters. At the Benedict Center, our work is rooted in supporting women who are navigating complex systems and challenges that are often shaped by trauma, inequity, and barriers that don't have simple solutions. Today's conversation is part of a larger effort to really deepen understanding, challenge some assumptions we may have, and to really think collectively about what meaningful change can look like. Traditionally, many responses to the challenges have been centered on enforcement. And while that has been the default approach, we know at the Benedict Center that it doesn't really tell the whole story. And it doesn't fully address the root causes or long-term outcomes. And the truth is, the answer is much bigger than enforcement. It requires us to think more broadly about community support, prevention, and systems change. So today, we're inviting all of us to begin rethinking what safety really means for our women in our community, because safety isn't just about immediate protection. It's about stability, dignity, access to resources, and the ability to thrive over time. And we believe each of us has a role to play in shaping what that looks like. And with that, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation and to learning alongside all of you. First, we will be talking to our Executive Director, Jean Gerasi. Jean is going to help ground us in what this looks like in practice, what's really happening with our women, and what we're seeing through our sisters program. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you, Diamond, and hello to everybody in the Zoom room.
Thank you, Jean. So, can you start by talking a little bit about our sisters program and who we support and some of the access tools we have?
Sure, thank you. I'm really excited because I see names in the room that I recognize, and so I know that they know about the Sisters program. In fact, some of them are partners of ours to make that possible. And I'm also seeing a lot of new names. So I will assume well, I'll just speak broadly and generally. So the Sisters program is specifically targeting women in the street-based sex trade, including women who are trafficked. There are certain sections or areas in the city of Milwaukee where the street-based sex trade has long been established. We're talking decades. Women in the street-based sex trade have a very high risk of violence, whether that's sexual assault, physical assault, even homicide. There's also a high percentage of women who have substance use disorders, whether that was the cause for getting into it in the first place or not. Almost all women in the street-based sex trade end up with some form of substance use disorder. Many of the women are without safe and stable housing, and some are, in fact, unsheltered outside. And as mentioned earlier, with the enforcement approach, they are at high risk for criminalization. They're very visible. It's very easy to scapegoat and target them. So We wanted to create a neighborhood level program so that we could reach women literally where they are, and ideally before the criminal justice system refers them to us, which is the case with our other programs. We generally have referrals from the criminal justice system. Here we wanted a community intervention. We also use a harm reduction approach, which is very strategic because this way women can begin taking their first steps towards health and safety, even if they're not ready for entering a complete abstinence treatment program. And so we use street outreach. We have a first and second shift of street outreach for incredible women that are dedicated to staffing that team. And that's often the first connection. They're building trust with women, they're building a relationship with women. And that's important because women have very little reason to trust anyone given all the things that they've been through. Our street outreach team provides basic human needs like hygiene items and food, clothing. Sometimes it's cold out and someone doesn't have a jacket on, that kind of thing. And also critically harm reduction resources that are really first and foremost to save lives, things like Narcan and fentanyl testing strips and the like. Then we have drop-in centers, one on the near north side, one on the near south side, and that provides respite for women to come in off of the streets and all of that entails. And a lot like day shelter services. So it's a warm meal, it's a hot shower, it's clean clothes, it's a place to sleep, although only during the day because our program's just a daytime program. And then we also have advocates and case managers who are located at each of those drop-in centers, and they're also creating relationships with women. And then, based on where a woman wants to start, they're there to say, okay, we're going to start with housing, we're going to start with this medical need, we're going to start with treatment, wherever that starting point is, there's staff ready to help women make those connections. So last year we served over 900 women through street outreach, 900 plus. And then in our drop-in centers, it was over 300 women that were able to receive services. It's hard to say exactly how many women are out there at any given time. I think it's probably undercounted, but we know that there's at least that many, right? So again, the key for us in our sisters program is harm reduction and low barrier access. We're bridging that gap where women are when they are in the throes of everything to the services that might require them to be abstinent from drugs in order to begin treatment or enter housing. So there's the space in between where we're working with women as they are bridging from one place to the other. So that's our sisters program in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Jean. So we're going to start off with our first question. What's one of the biggest misconceptions about the street-based sex trade, and what does the reality really look like?
Thank you, Diamond. I think the misconception I'd like to address is the one that women could walk away if they wanted to, that they have choices. They could go to a shelter, they could just go to rehab, just go. And the reality is it's not that simple. If they are being trafficked, they can't just go because someone else is forcing them or coercing them or manipulating them to be there. And fleeing from a trafficker is a huge risk for them. They might fear further criminalization if they reach out to law enforcement. They also might fear retaliation from the trafficker, especially if they are not, when fleeing, immediately connected to a safer place to be. Substance use is also used as a way of traffickers to control women and keep them sort of trapped in that cycle.
Mhm.
So it can take time for us to build trust with a person who's being trafficked. It's not that obvious. If you're just passing by, it's not that clear even to the police officers. And so it takes time until they feel safe enough, perhaps, to even ask for help. And then we also need sufficient victim services available to provide that help for them. And right now we're at an all-time low in funding for victim services across our country. So that's really another huge barrier. The other reason why they might not be able to just go to rehab or just go to a shelter is that, frankly, there's not enough, and there are waiting lists for both of those things. And
Mhm.
so we need people to understand at any given night the wait list for shelter beds, and the even longer wait list for housing vouchers, for residential drug treatment. There's wait lists, and even if you are in outpatient treatment without housing, without shelter, it's pretty difficult to actually be working towards your recovery because you're in a day-to-day survival mode and faced with all kind of other things. We have worked with women who have tried that. And to me, they're valiant for even trying because there just aren't any other options.
Mhm.
So nothing is harder for our staff, I think, than working with a woman who's ready and is asking for shelter or drug treatment, and those resources are not readily available. Our staff has gotten really good at navigating the limited resources that are there, and they will never give up. But it's heartbreaking when you can't do it on demand, frankly, which is absolutely what women who are at such high risk for so many things need. Studies also show that stigma and creates further barriers for women seeking assistance. The judgment that our society puts on women in the street-based sex trade becomes a barrier even to other social services. And so that's another piece that we need to unpack or um, as we're constantly reminded, I think about Sister Fran Cunningham, who's been a leader in helping us in the past, and she just continually said it's so important that we do not judge um, and one another, frankly, but certainly women in these circumstances. So really, we need to expand options for women, and then when they have real options, they can make good choices for themselves, and we know because we've seen it happen when those options are available.
Thank you so much, Jean. And what I really hear you name is something that can look like a choice from the outside can often be shaped by very real constraints, whether that is the stigma of believing these women deserve help, need help, want help, or if they or systems issues like housing instability, substance use, or trafficking.
That's right.
Right. So we're already being invited to move beyond some of those assumptions and really understand the conditions our women are experiencing. So my second question for you, Jean, is what factors most often lead women into these situations?
Well, I think that is certainly a question that many people, when contemplating this, wonder or ask. And at the Benedict Center, we recognize that there is no single story, and each woman has her own unique life's journey, and there are different factors and circumstances that might bring her into the situation. And because there's no single story, it's important. Our approach to in services is to center each woman as the person who best knows what she needs, and then
Hmm.
that's what we start with. But that said, there are certainly many factors in underlying risks and needs that women share in our experience. And this is specifically working with women in the street-based sex trade. First of all, there is a high percentage, probably like 99.9% of women who have experienced gender-based violence and victimization, whether that's sexual assault, early childhood abuse, or sex trafficking. There's also a high percentage of people with mental health disorders, and when they're on the streets, in many cases that's untreated. There's a high percentage of women who have substance use disorders, and poverty and homelessness are other common factors.
Hmm.
A recent study that we did with an academic partner showed that a little more than 80% of women in our program, in this study, I should say, um, had experienced some form of trafficking in their lives. So a trafficker is, or being trafficked is another. way that someone might end up in that story. So there's just such a variety. You know, one woman shared cocaine was the only pimp that she ever had. For another woman, it was how she and her boyfriend, who were both homeless, were supporting their drug habit. Another woman said it was the only way she could afford rent and diapers for her baby. So it's economic, it's situational. Um, it can be any number of things that um, might lead a woman there, but those underlying needs are very much identifiable, and we work to address those.
Thank you. I really appreciate how you said there's no single story.
Mhm.
And what stands out is that while each woman's path is different, there are shared patterns,
Mhm.
systems, and experience that continue to show up again.
That's right.
And that really enforces why individualized care and low barrier support really matters so much.
Mhm.
So, Jean, my next question for you is where do you see systems unintentionally reinforcing the cycle for women, even when supports are in place?
It's such a good question, a critical question, because um, the problem is not the woman herself. No individual person is a problem, but they're facing problems. And we need to recognize that it's not just a matter of individuals making bad choices, but that there are systemic underlying causes and factors and conditions that can influence. That's not to say there isn't personal accountability or agency, but when the odds are stacked against you, um, it's difficult. And so I'll just start with the primary system that the Benedict Center um, addresses, and that's the criminal legal system. Society's historic response, as we've said before, is to respond to women in the sex trade with criminalization. It's well documented that arrests and incarceration create a cycle that doesn't address women's underlying needs and, in fact, will make her situation worse. Criminal record's going to make it harder for future housing and employment. But even before that happens, the very act of arrest and booking and incarceration can be a traumatic event, especially for women who've already experienced complex trauma. A woman who has an opioid use disorder is going to be at a higher risk for overdose when she's released because that forced detox is going to lower her tolerance. And if she goes back and uses at the same level, we're looking at an overdose. So there's a lot of risks and harms with that criminalizing approach. And so not only does a lot of evidence indicate that we can't arrest our way out of this problem, it's also been recognized by leadership in Milwaukee Police Department, in the DA's office. And I've really appreciated that many of our partners in the criminal justice system do recognize that it's really support and treatment and help that women need more so um, than that traditional look. But Diamond, your question was how do systems reinforce the cycle even when support exists? And that's really the situation we're in. The Benedict Center Sisters program is an example of supports that exist, and yet the criminal justice system still feels compelled pressure to respond in some traditional ways of ticketing and arresting. And I think that the reason is that the progress of those existing um, services are simply not to scale that they need to be for the community to really feel relief or from that impact.
Mhm.
And so neighbors are understandably adversely impacted by drug use and sex trade in their neighborhood, and they want and they deserve safe and healthy neighborhoods. Everyone does. But the result, I'm afraid, is that decision makers start to feel like there's pressure that they have to do something, even though that something is a tool that we have already historically demonstrated isn't going to be a long-term solution to the problem. So the solution lies in actually other systems, not just the criminal justice system. It's the housing system, it's the behavioral health system, it's our public health systems. And all of those need to be scaled up so that advocacy groups like the Benedict Center and some of our other partners like Inner Beauty and Franciscan Peacemakers and others can walk with women in a much more effective and frankly faster way to
Hmm.
getting from being in harm's way to having a safer and healthier life. And that's why the Benedict Center is dedicated to systems level changes.
Hmm. Thank you so much, Jean. That's really powerful information. And what you're highlighting is that even systems designed to respond can sometimes deepen the challenge.
Mhm.
So, my next question for you is how does stability, especially housing, change what becomes possible for our women?
Thank you. From the beginning, women have told us, from the beginning of my experience with the Sisters program, women have told us that housing is their greatest barrier to exiting the streets. And then we confirmed this with data. Our academic partners helped us conduct some local research, and it confirmed that what our clients and staff actually already knew, which is that the majority of women do not have safe and stable or affordable housing. And in fact, many are either unsheltered or at high risk of it. Some women are trading sex just to have a roof over their head.
Mhm.
Women deserve better, but how? Benedict Center, for those of you who don't know, is not a direct housing provider. We really specialize in behavioral health and advocacy with justice impacted women and wraparound services, certainly, but we don't have housing. And so the question was really, how are we going to solve this problem if women are telling us this is what they need? And we could try and raise enough money for a shelter or transitional housing, and maybe someday we will. But at most, maybe that's going to be 6, 12, maybe 24 women. We have 900 women and counting that we're aware of. And even if just half of them were unsheltered, that wouldn't be near enough. We really need a systems level solution in order to make sure that that any woman who needs it can connect with it.
Mhm.
So we took a systems level approach and we started partnering with housing partners like Milwaukee County Housing Services. And Milwaukee County Housing Services was an early adopter of a strategy called Housing First. And this is a model that's been proven that if we provide safe, low barrier housing to people, unhoused people as a first step, they will be more successful in taking the second and the third steps. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We all need that baseline of safety and security. And for women who are at high risk for assault, you really do need the barriers of a wall and a door to keep
Mhm.
yourself safe. But when you're sleeping on the streets, you need one eye open, and even then. So housing first is really one of the primary strategies. And as a result of our systems level partnership with the county, we have been able to leverage additional resources for people who are homeless. Um, However, it's continuing to just again be a drop in the bucket. We now have dedicated funding for people who are homeless when they're fleeing violence, but that includes DV as well as sex trafficking. For the entire county, it provides 45 households with 2-year vouchers. Again, 45 households. That's not just for the Benedict Center, that's the entire community. And and we know that the need is so much bigger. So our challenge, and Milwaukee County absolutely agrees with us, is that we need to scale up. We need more resources. Um,
Mhm.
but that's a tall order. And now we have a new challenge. This current HUD administration is really shifting course. They are proposing, or actually trying to make it so that HUD funds, which is the largest source of housing resources, cannot be used for housing first, even though we have over 20 years of data showing that it does work. And they're looking at cutting funding across the country, which is actually going to increase homelessness. So we have to now really kind of fight and defend the little that we have before we can really even think about growing it out. But for that individual woman who gets a house, an apartment of her own, it's incredible the positive impact that that can make in her life in helping her um, take those next steps and really start to thrive.
Thank you, Jean. So, and what you're really naming is that housing isn't just one piece of the puzzle, that it's foundational. Without stability, it becomes incredibly difficult for anything else to take hold, whether that's recovery, employment, and most importantly, long-term well-being.
That's exactly right.
Yes. Jean has really helped us understand the what and the why behind the realities our women are facing and the systems surrounding them. Now we're going to shift to a community perspective because the issue just doesn't really exist in isolation, as Jean sort of mentioned earlier. Before we begin, before I introduce our second speaker, Jean, can you share a quick synopsis why the Benedict Center needed a community engagement coordinator?
Thank you. We've long wanted to engage residents in the neighborhoods that are most impacted by street-based sex trade, because we know it's going to take the entire community to pull together to find the long-term solutions that we need. And a little over a year ago, what is now called the City Department of Community Wellness and Safety partnered and made a strategic investment in the Benedict Center for us to create a position of a bilingual community engagement position. And so we're going to hear from Madeline, who is our very first community engagement coordinator. And we're just very grateful for that investment from the city, and so excited that this work has finally begun.
Thank you, Jean. So, Madeline's role at the Benedict Center is to educate and engage within our neighborhoods most affected by street-based sex trade. Madeline provides support to Empower, which is a collaboration to find long-term solutions for women in street-based sex trade. She has a master's degree in public health, and she is also bilingual in English and in Spanish. Hello, Madeline Miranda Navarro. Welcome to the
Hello.
conversation.
Thank you.
So, Madeline, my first question for you is, how do neighborhoods experience this issue and what sort of concerns arise?
Yeah, my work in community engagement is actually very concentrated in two MPD districts. This is districts 2 and 3. And for the reason for this is that Medical College of Wisconsin gave us data on where the majority of prostitution related arrests were. And so with my work, this is why it's concentrated in these two districts. Um, and these two districts, for those that don't know, District 2 is in the south side, and District 3 is in the near north side. So I've been working with these two districts, and for example, I do a lot of community engagement work with different neighborhood associations and organizations. So in the south side, we've seen like historic Mitchell Street, Clark Square, Muskego Way neighborhoods. And then near the north side is for example, Washington Park, and Midtown neighborhoods, which are in this area. But yeah, the neighborhoods do experience this concerns and issues, and what they have let me known is like the safety, their health, their well-being, and specifically their children. And because of the visibility and exposure to this activity, they have seen that they see this around businesses like schools, homes, particularly in the alleyways and in the backyard of these homes. And so, because of this activity, a lot of the litter is left behind because of drug use and sex trade. So, these are some of the concerns that I have been able to talk with the residents and they have let me know.
Thank you, Madeline, for really grounding that in such a real and transparent way. What I'm hearing is that the impacts of what's happening in the neighborhood is visible and affected by the or felt by the residents and businesses and families. And as a mother, I can relate to what that may mean. But
Mm-hmm.
I what I want to highlight is this reminds us that this conversation is not about choosing between supporting women or supporting communities, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
about how we can do both.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question for you is, how does your role in the Benedict Center
Mm-hmm.
engage with the residents, businesses, and community leaders?
Yeah. Well, my role as a community engagement coordinator, it's in the title, it's engaging. And so with that, our main population that we want to engage with is the residents, the business leaders, and community leaders that are experiencing these issues and concerns. But it really does start with the residents that are in these areas. A lot of what community engagement is starting that relationship with them.
Hmm.
It's really hard for me to go into a community and kind of start off and say what I want to say when I haven't had that grounding work of the relationship. A lot of them have also even let me know that there has been organizations in the past coming in and maybe like 6 months, maybe even a year, but then they disappear. So they
Hmm.
really are wanting that consistent relationship building, letting them know that we are actively there in the community. And it's the active listening and being open to the understanding of their concerns as well. Um, but I also don't have all the answers.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of it also includes realistic expectations and transparency in what I do. Um, I am also one of the many staff that here are in the Benedict Center, and we are doing our very best to provide resources to the women. But again, we don't have all the resources, like Jean said. So letting the community know that I'm there, but there are some roadblocks sometimes with what I do. Um, so they love the relationships that I have with them, but again, the transparency and the active listening. And so where I'm able to do this is by the neighborhood association meetings. For example, like I said, in the north side, there's like Washington Park area, and that area has an organization called Rooted and Rising, which I've been connected with. And in the South Side, we do have Southside Organizing Center, which has a lot of ties to the community, and they have been able to plug me in into different spaces, and so I can talk to the community.
Hmm.
The districts, like the MPD districts, also have crime and safety meetings, so I do attend again. Districts 2 and 3, their crime and safety meetings, and they have also let us plug in with presentations that we can do for the residents and the community members. And the third piece is also connecting with other organizations that are in these areas as well. So, how can we join forces and also be team players in the same space? So, being able to participate with like their resource fairs, any meetings that they have, any collaborative work that we can do with other organizations in these spaces as well. So, that's a little bit of what community engagement work is.
Thank you. And what really stood out to me is the role of active listening, as you said, and that
Yeah.
this work really starts with building trust, understanding concerns, and meeting people where they are, pretty much similar to like what we do in our sisters program. And that
Yeah.
feels like an important parallel to point out. The same approach that supports our women is also what helps bring our communities along.
Mm-hmm.
Madeline, would you like to share an example with us to give us a little highlight of what happens in the crime and safety meetings?
Yeah. I mean, again, a lot of the meetings that I go to are with a lot of these different entities. And so last year, crime, like the crime and safety meetings I did at a fall event. And so I ended up doing a presentation, and also with our operations manager, Mel. And so we were able to talk to the community and be able to give them a more understanding of what we do as a center as a whole. A lot of them were very curious of what we do because they had seen our van, our outreach van in the South Side. And
Hmm.
so they were wondering if we were connected to that van. So again, it's letting them know, hey, we have this organization, we have so many different programs and different resources. And so they were, again, very hungry for the knowledge of understanding
Hmm.
what we did. And so at the end of the presentation, I ended up having a survey question, and where the question was if they agreed that women should be connected to housing and treatment services rather than subjected to arrests, tickets, and fines. And so 85% of them said yes, like they agreed that women should be connected to resources and housing instead of arrests and jail. So that was just, I think that's just one example of what community engagement is, and building that relationship and education, and also answering like their questions. Um, and that was at the end of the year, but I have definitely laid the groundwork last year for those relationships. I ended up doing 49 meetings last year in 2025. And so I think towards the end of the year, I could really see that they really wanted to connect with me more and have more of those conversations, really open and honestly of what we do. And so I was really grateful that they were able to understand more about what we do. And again, 85% already said yes, like this is something that we would love to join you in that the women should be connected to housing and resources.
Hmm. Thank you, Madeline. And
Mhm.
I just want to highlight Madeline. She said she attended 49 meetings. There's only 52 weeks in the year. So, congrats, Madeline. And you are really
Thank you.
engaging in the ways that we are sharing is important. My
Mhm.
next question for you is, how do you navigate the tension between the community concerns and actually supporting the women themselves?
Yeah, the tension's always going to be there. I think it sometimes we think that those things can't coexist, like tension and support. But this is a reality for the neighborhoods that I work with, because again, they see what's happening in their neighborhood, but they also want to support the women. Like I said, 85% agreed that they did want to support women in those areas, but they
Hmm.
do have questions and concerns. And so that tension is there. But again, leading with that active listening, but not only active listening, but with really like empathy and compassion for what they are seeing in their neighborhoods. Um, but that also goes coincide with what the women themselves are experiencing as well. But teaching them and leading them to understand a lot more of the bigger picture,
Hmm.
that goes again with the transparency that I said earlier, is that they might not know everything that we do. And so leading them to understand the realities of what the women go through. And Jean talked about what really that is. And so
Hmm.
when we are able to understand everyone's part in the neighborhood, again, regardless of the conditions and realities of every person in the neighborhood, everyone should still be treated with dignity and respect. And when you do that, you can build a common ground with the neighborhood itself. And so that builds collectiveness, that builds mindfulness for the neighborhood as a whole. And then we can all bring solutions together. Again, not one person has all the answers. So if we're
Hmm.
able to join forces and really come together, that really helps those tensions and but still create support. And so the same example of the crime and safety meeting. When the residents understood better, the realities of the women and what they go through, they still had curiousness of other things. And so one of the residents asked, well, while we do understand what you do, we do see a lot of litter that's left behind in our neighborhoods. And again, there's a lot of people that live in the neighborhoods. It's not just one person, but they are still very concerned about that in their neighborhood, and that is the reality for them. And so even though that is something that they see, I let them know, again, this is a resource that we're able to give the women with our street outreach. We're meeting where the women are at, and sometimes that's the only space that we see them. And so when we connect with them and build trust with them through the outreach van, give them a harm reduction, a warm meal, clothes, that really builds that relationship with them. So if we stop giving those resources, it's really hard to have that connection if we're not starting somewhere, right? So if we it, I let them know that, but listening to them and understanding, okay, how do we also address the litter issue with them? So letting them know, hey, how about let's join forces and do community cleanups, maybe bring in other partnerships and where we can help the community navigate this situation and what they see. But it's doing both at the same time. And again, those two things can coexist, but it's a sensitivity of listening to both sides. But again, that is part of what the Benedict Center does, and we can't stop doing that. So,
Mhm.
mhm,
Thank you, Madeline. I
mhm,
really appreciate how you named that tension and also possibility can coexist. I
mhm,
really do appreciate that because it really helps bridge the us versus them and see this as a community level issue, and we all can be a part of the solution.
mhm.
So, my final question for you, Madeline, is where are opportunities to move forward, I'm sorry, toward more sustainable long-term solutions?
Um, yeah, I mean, this is a question that Jean touched up on as well earlier, but really understanding where the gaps are. Um, when we see the gaps there's gaps everywhere in behavioral services resources that we are having funding all of these things, but I think the number one that Jean touched up on, and I also agree as well, is the housing resources.
Mhm,
And like I said, we don't have that right now, but it's really, if we do want to create long-term solutions, it's definitely aiming toward the systems level change. And so when we can increase the access to housing for the women that we serve, that provides a more stable and safe place for the women to be in, and they can then be empowered to continue their journey to recovery and health. Um, so I mean, the long-term piece with the housing then in turns provides sustainability, especially for the
mhm,
women themselves. If they, I mean, the situations that they're in sometimes creates a cycle. If they're not in a safe environment, if they have again mental health issues, substance use, and so their road to recovery is not linear, but then that is also not sustainable. And
mhm,
so when you include that housing piece, that provides again a stable place, a permanent space for their road to recovery. um, but when they don't have it, it's really hard for them to choose in where they want to head towards, of like, either do I have food available or where do I sleep at night? They might have unsafe environments, violence that happens when they're not in stable housing. So um, long term and the sustainability definitely starts at in the home in any space. So that will then be the corner piece for their journey in their life and their recovery.
Thank you so much, Madeline and
Mhm.
Jean. Now we have a few moments to answer some questions within the chat. Jean, we do have one question that I'd like for us to start with, and it is from uh, Bevan, would you like me to read the question, or I'll read the question and you can clarify if Jean has questions. It's Bevan asks, can we clarify how we're defining trafficking in this context? She's asking because police data typically reflects only legally defined trafficking cases, which can differ from how service providers categorize individuals experiencing exploitation. Thank you for
Thank
that
you.
question.
Thank you, Bevan. That is a really good question, especially when we're trying to look at data or research, and we have to make sure how are we using terms, or are we defining those in the same way or differently so that we can understand. Um, when I mentioned the study, the researcher didn't ask like the legal technical definition, like have you been forced, coerced, or manipulated by another person? Um, they were asking questions like, has anyone ever controlled your documents? Do you have to give your money to, does someone else get all the money or control the money that you earn? So there were different aspects of it that added up to that 80% or a little bit more than that. And so any one of those pieces might not rise to the level of a case that a prosecutor could take to court. But we're still recognizing those instances when someone else is, in fact, applying some aspects of force, coercion, or manipulation. We also very much recognize that there are women engaged in what we call survival sex. There's not necessarily a person making them do that, but there are a set of circumstances that are bringing them there. And most important to us is the fact that it doesn't matter. Any woman in the street-based sex trade deserves dignity and respect, deserves support. We don't want to divide between the deserving and the undeserving. And we really don't know. And we want to honor how women define their own experiences. And we also recognize the complexity that a person can move in and out of those different experiences as well. So I hope that answers your question. We don't think all women in the sex trade are being trafficked. We don't define it that way. But in that study, you're right. We would not have met the legal definition. I will add, though, that sensitive crimes does refer victim witnesses to our program for assistance as well. And in that case, they are meeting that legal definition.
Thank you. It does answer my question. I manage bid 32, which is from 8th and North to 27th and North, 17th and Fond du Lac to 27th and Fond du Lac.
Uh-huh.
And so when I'm going to District Three's meetings and they're reporting and the community is saying like, wait, what do you mean you had like two cases? 15th and North is popping all the time, right? So,
Mhm.
um, so then when they broke it down and saying like, no, this is how we're defining it, like that was really eye-opening to me because I made the assumption that it was inclusive, and so I don't necessarily think what's happening on 15th and North is qualifying as like official criminal sex trafficking in the way that they're at least in the way that they're reporting it. So, but also would really love to work with you all because we are really taking a holistic approach my other question, sorry, is just how, because we know housing is an issue and you mentioned
Mhm.
the housing,
Mhm.
and Milwaukee County is kind of being put out there as a model of housing first, and it has even come out and said like they're pretty much eradicating homelessness. I don't think we're seeing that on the ground, but again, it's the technical terms they're
That's right.
using.
That's right.
So I just any thoughts, I guess, on the housing first
Yeah.
and like what that could potentially look like in these higher,
Mhm.
rate areas which the bid is included in.
Bevan, I'm so thrilled that you are here with us today. And would you please put your email in the chat so that Madeline and I can follow up? And definitely let's follow up with a meeting. If you're looking for some police-related data, you might ask or look at how many municipal tickets for loitering dash prostitution have been given. So again, women, even if they're experiencing aspects of sex trafficking, are very likely to still be criminalized, ticketed or arrested. And there's not necessarily a way of knowing for sure, just looking at a situation, what's going on. And women have a lot of reasons not to necessarily just simply disclose that when they have a police encounter. So that does make it hard to get our hands around the numbers. And then, yeah, the definition of eliminating, getting to net zero for homelessness is a very technical definition. United Way also is using a very technical definition when they say that they have made as much progress as they have in eliminating family homelessness. And so I think it's good to celebrate those things because they're solid accomplishments, but it's also important to acknowledge that there are other forms of homelessness that aren't meeting this technical definition, and those people very much still need resources and assistance. And we don't want to send the message that we figured it all out and we're all done and we don't need any more help.
Right.
So I look
Thank,
forward to sitting down with you, Bevan, with Madeline as well. Thank you.
thank you, Bevan. Do we have another question from our audience?
I
I
have a
think you'll
question.
go ahead, Jenna.
Uh, my question, I'm a new public health educator with the city, but part of why I'm asking is because my dad does construction. So I grew up partially on construction job sites and all that. So what partnerships do you all have with developers and people who own construction businesses around? I mean, is there any assistance or like partnership available for working with people on building new housing units in the county?
Then I love that. That's that goes to like where can we be innovative, right? And do new things. And I would welcome again a follow-up conversation along those lines. Our own landlord of where our Martin Luther King location is JCP Construction, and we've also had some conversations about what would it look like to invest or see a development. I think the real key there would still be funding, but it's interesting to me and potentially very innovative because we could be tapping other sources of funding, not necessarily just looking to HUD. So I think we need to put everything on the table. Nothing very developed has happened of yet, but again, would really welcome furthering the conversation.
Thank you, Jenna and Jean. Jenna, that was a very great question, and it makes me excited as the development director role that you are speaking of expansion. So we will reach out and talk more about that. We do have time for maybe one more question.
I do have a question. Can
Go
you
ahead,
hear me?
Wilma.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
All right. This is, first of all, let me just say this is a great conversation. I'm really excited that I was able to participate today. And Jenna, you brought up some really great points. I am a community resource navigator for the food share program. Part of my job is speaking to individuals that have barriers. Housing is a huge issue right now. So I agree with you 100%. I also come across a lot of women that are in the situations that we're talking about this afternoon.
Mhm.
And so my question is, what is the best way and the safest way to help those women and also be able to provide some type of assistance, because mainly what I do is when I'm speaking to them is usually over the phone.
Mm,
There's very few situations where they're actually in the office and
Mhm.
they're dealing with, domestic violence or, some of the other issues that you had already explained. And so, what's the best way, considering the housing issues, considering that, everybody can't go to Sojourner, like right now?
mhm,
And the reason why I'm asking is because there has been situations in the past where we had these either a woman on the phone, she needed help right now. We already know about, the housing. We already know about the shelters, and a lot of times we can't get them in right away.
mm.
What's the best way for somebody like myself that's speaking to a woman like that to help them so that it doesn't further their situation where we're putting them back in harm's way, but just being able to provide some comfort that there's programs out here like yours and the Benedict Center to assist.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome.
I knew I was excited for a good reason when I saw all these new names in
Mhm.
the audience, and I just look forward to really being able to hopefully sit down and have some deeper follow-up conversations,
Hmm.
Mhm.
because it is really important that social services we're all having these kind of different connects with
Yeah,
the same population, and so to better
right.
know about one another and then to be able to better make those cross referrals. I
Hmm.
want to reflect on I don't know that there's an absolute best way, and it sounds
Sure.
like you have a good sense of intuition, because if you don't necessarily know if somebody is alone on that
Yeah,
phone call or is safe
absolutely.
to talk,
Absolutely. Sure.
that would have to be established before being able to share more resources.
Right.
Um, Sometimes it's about making up an excuse to try and um, have that person come in. I don't know exactly your setup.
Hmm.
I don't know if I don't want to put her on the spot, but I'm gonna. Melinda Hughes is on the call, and if Melinda, you have any ideas off the top of your head, please chime in. But otherwise, um, maybe we could again have a follow-up conversation
Mhm.
Okay.
and explore that. But also, what we could do is, based on what we come up with,
Hmm.
um, share that out so that you're not the only
Mhm.
person who kind of hears the answer. I'm sure there's
Sure.
other
Sure.
providers on this call.
Okay. That sounds great.
Mhm.
Well, thank you all so, so much for joining us. I really wish we had more time to answer more questions, but Jean, Madeline, and myself are all available and are interested in connecting and building community as we talked about today. So, as mentioned, with this recording, will be available for your review. We will send it out via email. And thank you all again so much for spending time with us, with your friends here at the Benedict Center. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.